I've been having more of these discussions every day with people that have a misunderstanding of what they should be doing to get healthier. And one of the biggest topics that we speak about or talk about is playing a specific sport to get healthier. I'm going to talk about today why I don't feel that's true and why I feel that it's probably doing the opposite to your health. So stay tuned to find out why. I'm going to start off with the argument about movement is always going to be better than doing nothing. And I've spoken about this before, that the first part of what we look at is if somebody has never moved or is not moving in their life and then decides to do some type of sport, they're going from a -0 or a -1 to a 0, and that's always going to see improvement. It's irrelevant to this discussion. And getting somebody to move is always a big step, and that's always encouraged. And if it's through sport, then that's a great element to have. Problem I have with that is that people continue down that path, assuming that because they saw success in the beginning, that towards the middle or maybe the end of that journey, they're going to still see those successes compound beyond that. And the reality is like I said, when you go from -0 to a 0, then you'll see that improvement. But beyond that 0, to go from a 0 to a +1, that's where the problem starts to happen. And within this video, I want to talk about why I feel people need to move away from that sport activity as their health tool to going into something a bit more structured that will help them develop the necessary base to live a longer and more fulfilling life. Now, how I see things when it comes to health and wellness is that we need to understand a few elements of what defines health or fitness in terms of health. And I'm not talking about professional athletes because that's a very different discussion, and they're not necessarily healthy in that capacity where they're well balanced. They're very specialized in their sport. So I'm not going to sit there and say that a tennis player is healthy or not, or a marathon runner is healthy or not, because I can argue the point that they're probably not healthy in the parameters that we want to look at. So the first element of what I feel might be a critical point of that is, how do we train to live a longer and healthier life? And generally speaking, there's two elements that we need to focus on. The first one is building as much muscle mass as we can without using any exogenous or outside supplements to enhance that. And the second part is our overall heart health, which contributes to many other factors within that. So maintaining our weight as well, that comes hand in hand with that. And understanding that these elements are what are going to contribute positively to a longer and more fulfilling life. And it's all about the risk versus the reward of what you're doing. And I want to start off with an example of somebody that has never moved, for example, and decides that they want to join a jiu-jitsu class. And I'm using jiu-jitsu because I can relate to that. And they come and they do the basic classes and they learn the fundamentals, and then they continue from that. And so they've gone from never moving to starting to move or exert some energy, and they're sweating and they feel like they're doing something positive for their health. The momentum that creates and the small gains in how they feel, and they start to sleep better and they start to feel that their muscles are working because they're sore, it starts to create a ripple effect where they start to eat a bit better and they're a bit more active, and this starts to compound. Now, that's great and it works to a certain extent, assuming that that person does not injure themselves in that process. Within a month or two, maybe they hit an injury because they don't have the muscle stability or the muscle strength to avoid any impact when it comes to dynamic movement. And this could be applied to any other sport, whether it's basketball or playing football or whether it's playing tennis. These sports in general are dynamic in nature, and that means that I need to have the joint stability to be able to withstand any sudden movements that my body's going to do. So I go from somebody that has never worked out or done anything to playing a sport, let's say twice or 3 times a week, or doing that, and they're enjoying it and they're loving it. Problem is, after a few weeks, they start to get better and better at it. They start to become more aggressive with that sport, and then bam, they hit into an injury, whether their shoulder starts to hurt or whether they roll their ankle or their knee starts to hurting because they're carrying extra weight, and now they're pounding it with some dynamic movements. This is where the problem happens. So they've gone from doing nothing to starting a sport and loving it and seeing results to injuring themselves and stopping altogether. So I look at it as the risk versus the reward of what you're getting doesn't add up. And it's not logical that I would put somebody in that position where I said, yes, you should go play a sport. Now, having said that, if we look at the flip side of it, and we take somebody that's healthy and active and does work out and so on, and they decide that they want to start to play a sport, whatever that is, let's say football for this video, then it complements their fitness. And what I mean by that is what they do in the gym in terms of weights and in terms of cardio is expressed from the sport that they choose. So you're showing your fitness or you're using your fitness for something that you enjoy. And that's great. But the thing is, when they play that sport, even if they're fit, how much value does it add to their life in terms of their longevity? And my argument here is that it doesn't add much because it's not a structured program where week in, week out, we're seeing progressive overload in terms of what we're doing. There is value added and there is overlapping between what that sport does and your health. I definitely agree with that part, but it's definitely not something that is the most efficient way for you to get to where you want to go. And I'll even argue the point that the risk versus reward of that might outweigh, in terms of the risk, what you're trying to achieve with your health. Now, it doesn't mean we don't play sports, but we've got to be a bit more structured and smart about it before we enter into that world where we want to test our fitness in some type of sport. So what I'm trying to get to is that if anybody is trying to look for a way to get healthy, it needs to be done the proper way. And it might not be the sexiest or the most entertaining way possible, but if we're playing the long game, that we want to be able to do this weeks and months and years, then we've got to make sure that the risk of injury is as low as possible. And we build a base for the body to be able to withstand any problems down the road, whether you want to play a sport or whether you're getting old and you might be walking upstairs and you trip, your body needs to be able to handle that. Now, that means that we need to have a proper structured strength training program that's catered towards that person's needs. And we would never take somebody that's more advanced in terms of strength training, that's been doing it for a few years, and give that same program to somebody that has done zero strength training. And an example of that would be some kid maybe that is 13, 14 years old, is just starting to want to work out and get stronger because they're playing sports and they want to see their performance go up. It's very wrong to sit there and throw in dynamic movements for that person to do when they haven't got a base. And the first step of that pyramid as we go up is building joint stability and the ability of those joints to react and adapt to certain stimulus that we put on it. So if I sit there and give a kid a lot of jumping movements or a lot of dynamic lateral movements back and forth, and they don't have the skeletal strength or the muscular strength to be able to withstand that, over time, there's going to start to become problems with the way they move and the risk of them injuring themselves because they've developed bad habits when it comes to certain movement patterns. So with somebody that is young, 13, 14 years old, and they want to start to get stronger, probably the first step, and I'm generalizing here, but probably the first step in what they want to be doing is doing isometric holds. And that's just basically holding a squat in the bottom position for a certain amount of time, holding a pull-up position or on the rings, a plank. All of these are positions that you're doing without putting any risk into the body until it gets strong or to a certain point where you're able to throw in a higher range of motion. And once you've done that, then it builds a beautiful base for that person to build from and not encounter any problems down the road and reduce the risk of any injuries that might happen from the sport that they choose doing. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about is why do I feel that sports don't add in terms of your health and wellness? So the elements that we do know when it comes to health and wellness is the fact that we need to build up our VO2 max. And VO2 max is a fancy way of saying how much oxygen your body uses when you're working out and how efficient it is at using that. And the higher that number is, the more efficient you are at utilizing oxygen. And why is that important? Because that gives us the base for our bodies to utilize as we get older. And as we get older, it diminishes. So we have to have the highest number possible and try to maintain that throughout the years as we get older. Now, how do we increase our VO2 max? And there's two elements to this puzzle, and I have a video about that. The first element is doing a zone 2 cardio. And what is zone 2 at the end of the day? Just very briefly, because I've spoken at length at this, and you can watch my other videos, that we're talking about long sustainable pieces that you can keep your heart rate elevated ever so slightly. So now I'm in zone 1, and if I just brought it up a notch, that will be a zone 2, and it's usually how we test that is through the talking test. And basically, if I'm able to hold a conversation, then I'm probably in zone 2. And if that's correct, then it's probably something I'm not enjoying doing, but I can still talk, all right? And that's a very rough way of calculating if you're in zone 2 or not. Some people use their watches to see where they are, and it's not 100% accurate, but eventually, the more you do it, the more you'll understand what zone 2 looks like. And you're looking at getting 180 to 200 minutes a week of zone 2 cardio to be able to increase the base of your VO2 max. And then the top of that pyramid, okay, and how high it can go is basically your zone 5 or your very high intensity workouts that you'll do at least once or twice a week. And what that is interval training. The simplest way you can do this, and there's many ways that you can chop this up, is doing a 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off protocol 3, 4, 5 times in a row. And that will yield the best result when it comes to your peak performance. And that's getting your heart rate up above 90% and sustaining that for about 4 minutes. Sometimes you can do it for 3 minutes and changing that up over time. But that's the simplest way we can do it. So what sports, and if you can think of any that I can't think of, put them in the comments definitely. But most sports won't sustain that in terms of a zone 2 for a long period of time without interruption. So I'll use football, for example, and if you're playing, or soccer, wherever you're watching this from, and basically if you're playing an hour-long game, if it's recreational, then the majority of the time you're probably walking around the pitch, and you'll get some small bursts of sprints every now and then. Your heart rate goes up and then comes down again, goes up, comes down again, and it won't be sustained, which is what we're looking for, at a slightly above normal range for a long period of time. So we eliminate that, and that can apply to tennis, that it can apply to basketball, it can apply to most sports. Even jiu-jitsu, when you look at it, there's no way you're going to be in a zone 2, even when you're kind of drilling or doing other things that are maybe low intensity, because it's not a sustained. You're not going to be doing that for 30 minutes or 40 minutes. The flip side of this is that when we look at zone 5, we're looking at a high intensity, so something extremely difficult, something you won't be able to sustain for a very long period of time. Most sports don't address that either. And you'll have high spikes for a minute, maybe 2, and then it'll drop down again, it'll spike up again. And football is the same thing. You sprint for 30 seconds, it'll come down again, come up. So you're not pushing that threshold to yield the results that you want. Now, having said that, the same thing applies for football or any other sport where you're trying to push the limit, but it's not a sustained thing. And boxing is the same thing. All of these sports are not things that are sustainable or measurable, and the variables are controlled. Even from week to week, doing sparring or any other type of activity is not going to sustain that. So those two elements that I just talked about are the elements that we need for better health. So the sports don't do that. And that's what I'm trying to get to at the end of the day, is that don't use your sport as your health matrix. And I've seen this so many times that people are out of shape, they haven't done anything, they decide they want to do a sport, and they think that's the solution to them being active. The reality is, and the right way to do this, is to do proper strength training or resistance training in the many forms that exist, whether they're weights, whether they're things like calisthenics, whether they're things like resistance bands, even to a certain extent Pilates and yoga can provide resistance training if done in a certain way and depending on that person. But that's the resistance training. That's the part where your muscles need to be challenged to grow. And the other element of that is your heart health or your cardio health, where you're either going for a long, slow piece that you can sustain for a long period of time, 30 minutes to 45 minutes, let's say. And the other part is that high intensity zone 5, where you're going all out for a short period of time, maybe 3 to 4 minutes, you're resting, and you're doing that again over and over again. Again, I will argue the point that there isn't a sport that I can think of as a sport that would do that. All right. And that's why the video I'm talking about is trying to tell people and educate them that this isn't the way that you're going to get healthy and live a longer life. Even with that, and this is another part that is so important, even if you do find a sport that you enjoy and you don't injure yourself and you're seeing results with, the issue with that is it's usually a sport that is dominant in specific areas. And what I mean by that is that it will only address certain elements within your fitness. And I'll use jiu-jitsu again, that as a jiu-jitsu sport, the predominant amount of work that you're going to be doing is a lot of pushing. So that's your pec muscles, your shoulders are going to be doing a lot of work. And that neglects a lot of other things within your body, specifically your legs and your lower back and the stability muscles that you need to avoid injuring your lower back. That's another thing you need to be very cautious about, that you're very specialized when it comes to a sport. All right. And even if you have 2 or 3 sports that you play, it's a lot of pounding into the body and a lot of volume that goes into it. So if you enjoyed that video, that's great. And obviously subscribe down to the channel and share it with people that might benefit from this. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, where I send out a lot of information, useful resources and tools that you can use in your everyday life. You can also, if you're interested in running, I have a completely free program for anybody that's looking to run a 21K, and it's structured for 3 times a week as well. So enjoy your weekend, and remember that sports are not the way to your health. It's the other way around, that you express your fitness or your health through the sports that you play. Enjoy your day.